So this is a genuine thrill for me because I have been an eager listener to these podcasts with David Samson and John Skipper, two friends and colleagues of mine, one of whom happens to be my boss. But I am an eager listener because I just don't get to hear this level of kimono opening when it comes to how rich and powerful people think about the things that I think about. And so thank you guys for allowing me to, ride sidecar here and try and prod you into being almost irresponsibly honest.
That'll be easy for me. What about you, John? Are you ready for that, for some kimono opening?
Sure. I'm just concerned about what's underneath the kimono.
So underneath the NBA's kimono right now, or at least in the case of the Washington Wizards and their parent company, Monumental Sports and Entertainment, happens to be a 5% ownership stake by the Qatar Sovereign Wealth Fund. And so this is a story about, yes, sports washing and about foreign money, but it's also a story about what Adam Silver, the commissioner of the NBA, someone John has known for a very long time personally, because Adam Silver said about this story, quote, "In the foreseeable future for sovereign wealth funds, there is no pathway for those minority ownership stakes to become controlling majority ownership stakes." And I just wonder how both of you, John, let's start with you. How do you process that quote and now this development?
I actually think that David in our last show explained it to me in a way that was beyond my comprehension before. I'll explain it in a more anecdotal way. I once had a present NBA owner who had 80 or 90% of his team tell me that he had learned that he could get every benefit of owning a team by owning 50.1%. So I mostly think here Adam is opening the door for those owners to sell portions of their teams. They do not give up any benefits other than illusory profits, which aren't there, and they'll give up some profit in the upward momentum of the valuation when they sell the team, should they choose to do so. But in terms of enjoying owning a team, it's like selling 40% of a painting, but keeping it in your living room all year long. You still get to see it all day, and somebody else gets to say they own 40% of a painting.
The problem with that,
or 5%.
The problem with that Adam's going to have, in my opinion, is that he's opened the door. And it started with golf. It's potentially going to tennis, potentially now in the NBA, MLB, and the NFL that are going to get there as well. And what I don't like are quotes that say never, because you should never say never. And I believe there is a list of people who can own majority of teams when the average price is $1.5 billion, $2.5 billion. What happens when you start selling teams at $8 billion, $12 billion, $14 billion? The number of buyers shrinks, and having sovereign fund money, where it's reported that they've got $700 billion in a sports fund to spread around in the effort to wash it, you're going to get teams, and eventually you're going to get controlling ownership of those teams.
But the idea of the washing, like how much does the NBA care about what the fallout, what the outcry has been as a result of the LIV PGA golf story? Because this headline about Qatar buying this 5% stake of the organization that owns the Wizards, it would indicate that they put their finger in the wind and said, seems like it's all right for us to get into this.
Do you remember how they dealt with China? They do so much business with people where you'd wonder why they're doing business, and it's because it's business. Adam Silver gets paid the money he gets paid because he's there to grow the game and grow the value of the asset. And having potential investors who have that amount of money, that is growing the game and growing the value of your team.
That is correct. And Adam is not the CEO of a traditional business. He works for an association of 30 teams owned by 30 different people, and ultimately has to navigate a path through what he thinks is the right thing to do and what they tell him they want to do. In this case, they clearly, per David's point, they want their valuations to go up, but they don't want to have that much capital in a team. So this is an easy source of a certain amount of money. So that's, I think, what is going on.
When you get asked, John, if you were doing a capital raise and you were doing it because you needed money, you needed an infusion to turn your back on a faucet that could open up and sprinkle you at great terms and an endless supply of money.
$500 billion, by the way, is roughly what we're discussing with the QIA and, yes, the PIV, the Saudi Public Investment Fund.
That's $500 billion.
Well,
Yes.
I believe one time Winston Churchill, in a fairly salacious comment, suggested that everybody had their price. Mine is $1 trillion, so I'm never going to say never. Anybody wants to offer me $1 trillion, I am going to forego any principles I have and lay down and be showered by that money from the desert, as Brent Musburger used to say about our desert.
But John, just so you're clear that you're saying that in a joking way, but the serious nature of what you said is now we're just talking price.
That's what Winston Churchill said, and you can look up the circumstance.
The circumstance is if it's a sovereign fund, if it's Qatar, if it's killing a journalist, if it's sports washing,
No,
the price goes up.
In this way, John, this is not to, again, quote Churchill in a different way. This is not exactly a riddle wrapped in a mystery inside an enigma. This is a very straight up, it's a very straight up financial calculation that is weighed against a PR calculation that indicates that every time I have to remind people, oh, by the way, like Qatar just bought a share of the Wizards, because it's not just a thing that everybody is like protesting over. It indicates that that calculation has tipped so firmly in the direction of, yeah, give me the trillions.
It again, what puzzles me the most is why people accept money from this kind of source that will not change their lives in any really substantial way. So I at least have the courage of my convictions if it's not going to change my life in any way that matters. So if the Saudis offered me $1 million, I would tell them no. If they offered me $1 trillion, I would say yes. And there's the answer for what my ethics are worth is somewhere in the middle.
What do you guys want to do with $1 trillion? As a guy who does not ever expect to have $1 billion, what does $1 trillion do for you?
You cannot spend it. There's no way. If it was your full-time job to spend $1 trillion, unless you are the U.S. or the Chinese government, there is no way to spend that kind of money.
It's actually would be more than a full-time job. You'd build a 1,000-employee company whose sole job it was to give away money, and you still would have money left over even in an underperforming market. So once you get to the letter T, it's past the point. Some would argue when you get into the B's, it could be past the point, though there are people who can lose billions at the drop of a dime.
Yeah, if we could get the PIF to donate the entire fund, it would pay for about 2% of the U.S.'s national deficit.
I like that we have a Brewster's trillion situation, and we're going to solve a fraction of the U.S. debt.
It should be very telling. The numbers that we're talking about, I think that's the hard part when you're communicating with people. And Adam Silver really tried to dumb it down in a positive way, which you have to do when you're trying to get past the PR, because the numbers are people's eyes roll to the back of their heads. You can't comprehend what that is.
It's funny to hear the word trillion.
But now it's got a face. So it had a face with Liv, where you had the chairman of the fund who's going to be running golf in theory. We don't know exactly how or who's reporting to who. But he basically walks around saying, look what I have. I have a $500 billion that I need to spend somewhere. Help me help you.
But this, John, this is where I just wonder if there's even a debate anymore about whether sports washing works. Because it feels like if the point is you buy into a share of something that people like more than they want to get mad at the immoral buyer about, then it works. Like that's that basic math, isn't it?
I don't think the simple fact that they're succeeding in buying portions of American institutions or buying teams that people still go to visit. I don't think Newcastle fans are going, they now go, great, we got a whole bunch of money to compete with Man City. I don't think they go, this makes me think very differently about Abu Dhabi than I did before. I don't think it works. I think they're kidding themselves. And of course, it may be possible if you read the athletic story on the negotiations that went on between Jay Moynihan and I cannot remember the name of the Saudi gentleman who has a big bushy head of brushback hair.
Oh, Yasser, yes.
Yeah, I think it's possible he just wants to be close to Tiger Woods and Roy McIlroy. And I guess they rationalize that by saying that they are creating a better atmosphere for their company to thrive in the world they must live in, but I don't think it does anything.
Well, this is really interesting because Yasir Al-Rumayyan, yes, is the head of the Saudi Public Investment Fund. And I also read a story in the Washington Post, John, that indicated that, yes, this guy just loves golf. That, in fact, this isn't some grand game of moral chess. There's a bit of, like, bro checkers here. He just wants to hang out with these guys. And I wonder, look, I'm not suggesting that they are creating sleeper cells inside of the Washington Wizards organization or the PGA. But I just wonder if just the numbness, the lack of eyebrow raised at, oh, by the way, these guys are here now. Like, if that's just enough.
What made me smile is that during the negotiation, I pictured, and John, in any negotiation, when people walk in, you look at what they're wearing, you try to understand what they're after. The best way to win a negotiation is to understand what the other side wants and then to overvalue it and hold onto it until you have to give it back. And it turns out that one of the important negotiating points in this merger is that he actually wanted to be a member at Augusta.
Of course.
And that was a thing.
Of course.
Can you imagine when you're negotiating to get $1 billion sponsorship, which is really what this is, and all he wants is to meet Tiger Woods and tee off at Augusta? It's like manna from heaven that you find someone with this kind of money, and that's what he wants. Side note, he kills people.
This is, John, it's the greatest testament to the business that you guys have been and are still in. This is why sports matters. It's because these guys who have all the money in the world, they want to belong in this literal club, Augusta, NBA ownership, all of this stuff.
Yeah, it's a tradition like no other.
They'll let in people from the sovereign fund before they let in Jews and black people, right? They do now a little, but this is...
Hey, Condoleezza Rice is handing out programs somewhere, David. Don't forget her.
My bad. That solved all that, checked every box, right? All at once. So it's not that I'm anti-Augusta. It's just interesting that becomes a negotiating point in $1 billion transaction.
It is impossible to be anti-Augusta when you remember that James Brown grew up in Augusta. That's it. That's the best thing about Augusta.
James Brown's family, John, would have been Airbnb-ing their property during the Masters to get the money back from all of these people who are coming in, again, because they want to be in the exclusive club. Okay, so we have Greg Norman, and we have the PIV, and we have Washington, and we have all of this stuff swirling around. And I actually want to move on to what the MLS, or actually not the MLS yet, because that's also going to be involved with the question of ownership and team valuations. But tennis, let's not forget tennis. Billie Jean King, right? Like, we talk about who would be useful for these sovereign funds to have in their corner. Well, maybe a progressive gay icon.
What strange bedfellows.
Would be useful in that way.
I was blown away, Pablo and John, when I saw Billie Jean King and her view of a potential sovereign fund investment in tennis. Because my view, I actually thought that what Billie Jean King was trying to do, I went back to the Bobby Riggs match, all about equality. And it turns out the only thing that Billie Jean King cares about is that women make the same amount of money as men at the tournaments. It turns out that is her demarcation. Wherever the money comes from, don't care. Misogynistic? Fine. Murderous? Fine. As long as we're equal. I couldn't believe it.
I would quarrel with that. Knowing Billie Jean King, she does care about more than just equal pay. In fact, she's in the pantheon. If you want to name the 10 athletes who have done the most to advance the cause of disenfranchised or underenfranchised populations, she's right there with Bill Russell and Muhammad Ali and Jim Brown and Martina Navratilova. In this case, and I actually am surprised because I do believe she has principles that she holds dearer than money. She has sacrificed money to be herself in public. And she has generally stood with the Women's Sports Federation for helping people. She does believe that gender pay equity is an important issue, but I was surprised. Some of her comments were not about gender equity. They were about the idea that if you actually let this money in, I believe the quote was, some person is in the stands. We might affect them. You affect one person in the stands. They become a leader. So you never know. So we should take this money because something good might happen. That's what Richard Nixon said when he went to China.
That's right.
Right? We're going to get these people involved in our world. They're going to understand that liberty is better than autocracy. They're going to understand that capitalism is better than communism. And it doesn't work. It's the same thing. Dick Cheney said they're going to throw flowers at us when we march in to Baghdad, and it didn't happen. It's American. It's not American exceptionalism. It's American arrogance to think that other people exposed to our way of life will simply decide to adopt our way of life. And it's the great rationalization for let's take their money because you know what? We might actually do some good and change their world.
John, so, it took you 5 minutes to prove my point about your issue. You put the number at T at $1 trillion. That was your number for your principles. We already now have seen 5 minutes later that Billie Jean King, who you are calling a woman of great principle, her number was clearly lower than a T, yet you're not willing to acknowledge that this is my point where your number may be huge and unreachable. Other people's number may be realistic and reachable. And that's their whole point, is to find people where their number is reasonable, and then you work your way in that way. John McEnroe would hear none of it. He doesn't want any part of it, doesn't understand it. But Billie Jean King, she heard the number and hit the bid. So, John, I'm not understanding how you would not see that Billie Jean King is you. Just with
I'm not sure there's a specific number here that has been on the table. I don't think she's reacting. She's reacting to an idea. She's more open to it than I would have thought. I would have thought she and McEnroe in this case would agree. In this instance, I'm with McEnroe. And of course, the good news is I don't seem to have anything that anybody wants to give me bad money for that would force me to
not with that attitude, John Skipper.
That would force me to betray my principles because they hit my number. It doesn't seem to be in the cards.
Can I confess to my own hypocrisies here? Because my goal when we do stories like this, the reason I wanted to lead today's show with this is because I believe that we don't talk enough about what the trade-offs are, what the prices we're paying are for the compromising of our principles. But at the same time, if I'm honest, I'm watching all of this stuff. And more than that, I'm also living in a country with a government that makes deals with Saudi Arabia, with Qatar, with all of these entities, because, of course, compromise is politics. And so what I am just left with here as a defense of Billie Jean King potentially is the realpolitik of this. She's looking around and thinking, why do women's athletes, why do we got to be the ones who don't get to drink from this fountain while everybody else does? Why? Because we have our principles?
That's exactly how the fountain changes color. And it becomes, instead of wine, that's how you turn wine into water. That exact principle where everybody says, oh, he's doing it, therefore I can do it. I could go back to Germany, the Holocaust. I could go to a million places where the view that you're proffering is the downfall of civilization. And I don't want to overstate it, but I do want to point out that—
if we take it seriously, we are, John, that slope is pretty slippery.
Yes. And look, we're not really confronting what this really means. It's not a trade-off of, oh, we'll take your money and it's making you more respectable. That's because I just said I don't believe it actually does much good.
Agreed.
What you are doing here is you are tacitly endorsing a regime that continues to create climate change, refuses to help us in any way get off fossil fuels, actually creates shortages so that the price of that oil goes up. And that is what you enable. It's not that they get to be a member at Augusta. It's that we continue to perpetuate a regime whose interests are antithetical to our own, to the planet's, to our way of life. That's what's really at stake here. And the rest of this is just trivia and effluvia.
It's the loudest hush money in the history of man. That's what they're doing.
I fully agree, by the way. John, you mentioned earlier the notion that we are exporting democracy. No, I mean, look, this is the whole thing with China, right? We're importing autocracy. We
Yes.
say we're doing one thing, we are doing the opposite by again. And I say the word normalize, but I'm afraid of it because it feels just like fluff, right? Like this woke language. But actually, what it means is we don't look askance when these people are in the rooms where you guys were making deals. And so I want to take us, I guess, John, I want to take us into soccer now, because what America is trying to do here is build a new sport with valuations that are ostensibly one day gonna be like what the NBA and Major League Baseball and the NFL, these leagues we've been talking about, what they are like. And I'm just wondering, what do you make of the MLS as a viable place that, yes, may one day also be able to strike these $1 trillion deals?
I think that MLS is doing very good business here. Their valuations are going up. They're already there. The question is whether the MLS is becoming a major league. They have a team, the LAFC, that's valued at $1 billion. Wasn't an NHL team just sold for $980 million?
The Ottawa Senators. They rounded it up to $1 billion.
Okay, so they're one of the big four, and the MLS has a team that is on par, and my guess would be that the MLS teams will continue to rise. There'll be some new expansion fees paid. $375 million was paid for Charlotte. I think they have another team coming in. I can't remember, next year or the year after. And I would bet that these are going to hit $500 million pretty quickly. The fee for entry.
Imagine what baseball will be when they expand. So the thing that soccer's doing, John, that interested me the most is Don Garber has always been the one who likes to be invited to the commissioners' dinners. If someone were doing a cartoon of the commissioners all eating dinner, it would have Garber at the kids' table, sometimes with Bettman, which would really piss Bettman off.
So he's not even Ringo. He's not even in the photo.
Yes, in the photo.
Well,
I'm not at the main table.
He's Billy Preston. Right? He's adding some beautiful organ fills to I Won't Ye. She's so heavy. Look, I actually have a less cynical point of view of that, not surprisingly, David. Don Garber wants to be sitting with the other commissioners because his job is to elevate the value of that league. And if he can get talked about in the same breath as those other four leagues, he increases the valuation. I think he's just doing good business. My experience is that his ego is not any larger than the average human beings walking the earth.
I think that Inter Miami, with the deal they did with Messi, and MLS in general with what they did all the way back 15 years ago when I negotiated with David Beckham for the expansion team in Miami. Yes, I was with Beckham and Beckham's representative because we wanted to do a baseball stadium and a soccer stadium. We wanted to do it together, and we would take over Miami. And I asked the reason that deal fell apart, I don't know that I've ever talked to you about this.
No.
Is I demanded certain numbers of appearances by Beckham in Miami. I wanted to meet with sponsors. I wanted to meet with season ticket holders. And he was only interested in what was going on the pitch. He did not want to be bothered with any of the other stuff. And to me, the purpose of having Beckham would be to do business. And if you look at business, Beckham's piece of business coming over to L.A., the Galaxy way back when, is one of the great pieces of business of all time, as his entry fee into ownership was at a valuation of $25 million. So everybody was looking to partner with Beckham because he had a team that he owned at a very low valuation. And so now they bring in Messi, and they're trying to make their league one of the four. But look where the payrolls are.
Right. I mean, you just mentioned a payment to David Beckham that is about the salary cap?
They make it. They've got a great system in place because they don't have the revenue.
Of course you like that it's
of course
this low.
Well, their revenue. You've talked about valuations, John, and you say they're doing well. I'm not aware of MLS teams. There are some, but the majority of them have trouble operationally. Inter Miami, which Inter Fort Lauderdale, whatever you all want to call it, 18,000 capacity in Fort Lauderdale, they are not printing money by any stretch. And so these teams are counting on asset appreciation, but they have to worry about current day cash flow. And so the investments that come in, the sponsorship deals that come in, you've got to keep your employee costs down, which they do.
And they do that way. It's also why you end up selling part of your team, is because you don't want to reach in your own pocket and pay for the stadium upgrades or for a free agency signing. So if the PIF will pay for that for your Washington Wizards, why not take? I mean, I just explained why I don't think it's a good idea, but why not take the money and pay for that rather than taking it out of your own pocket?
Well, this is raising the question, too, of the MLS is in a position where they're watching all of these more mature leagues in America make these calls, expand their salary caps, do all of this stuff. And if you are an owner in this league, in the MLS, what are you afraid of? What are you afraid of happening?
I'm afraid right now that what the exception made to Jorge Mas in Miami, where Messi is not subject to salary cap, he has equity in the team, has a deal with Apple. I'm worried that now I'm going to have to pay players that amount of money as well and blow through my salary structure and completely crush my ability to operate. So I'm not happy with what Miami did to get
Despite
Messi.
the fact that Messi is bringing all these headlines to Major League Soccer, and David Samson is saying this is bad because I might be one of the 8 MLS teams, or I might be one of the teams that have a negative operating income because only 8 of them seem to have one.
Well, remember, once Messi's in, now let's say he's the top of the market. There's still going to be people who want to be transferred and play for a Major League Soccer team, and they're not going to want to be subject to the salary cap. This is absolutely, they ignored the cap for this signing, which defeats the purpose of a cap.
Well, they have a cap. They have created this idea, appropriate in America, of exceptionalism, which is that if you get an exceptional player, you can take that outside the cap. All right. They did that for Beckham originally, or they did a deal they wouldn't do. When Ibrahimovic came, he was an exception. Robbie Keane was an exception. So they've got this thing where they still have a low overall cap, but you get a chance to go buy 1 or 2 players. The problem is it is shocking how little one player, and I think people will be surprised. I could be wrong. I've been somewhat wrong about some of the benefits of this Messi trade already, but they are the worst team in the MLS, I believe, last year. And one player will not make them the 6th best team in the league. That's the way soccer works. It's 11 people. It's not like basketball where 1 or 2 great players, you can put some role players next to them. If your rest of your teammates are making, he will have some teammates making $100,000, right? Which he'll make before the whistle blows, ending the first half.
Way more than that.
It can't be good for team chemistry. Ultimately, yeah.
Wait, so
ultimately, and you do have right now a conflict. There are teams in the MLS who want to spend money, right?
Yes.
The soccer is the only sport in the world where there is a world market, and where if you wanted to make the MLS be ranked as the 3rd best league in terms of team play and player rankings, you could do that in about 2 years.
Well, this is what's so interesting to me.
But to your point, David, the owners don't want to do that because they're going to lose a lot of money.
What's interesting is that there is because, John, to your point, there are so many soccer players globally that are better than the average MLS player, that these are just checks away, like signed checks away, but they don't want to do it. And more than that, what you guys are suggesting is that the MLS, with the Messi thing, with Inter Miami's whole big splash announced this past week, you're saying that this is actually problematic for the sport. It's a net negative in a sense, is what you're saying.
I'm viewing MLS as AA. Is that fair? Can I get any cosign on the fact that Major League Soccer is like a AA baseball team?
Well,
John?
No, only because it's not actually a feeder into someone else's organization or franchise.
Quality of the team.
But John's even being more.
Generally speaking,
no one's even taking.
Nobody will quarrel with the fact that the quality of play in the MLS is somewhere between around 7, 8, or 9 in the world.
So if
there are 6, 7, 8 leagues better in the world than MLS, one of those leagues, which is arguably slightly better or slightly worse, is Mexico. And I do believe a tremendous piece of business that is being done by MLS. I think that this new Leagues Cup is a very good idea, and I think will ultimately do very good business. It seems to me to be getting a little bit lost right now in this summer, and the summer of Messi, and the summer of the Women's World Cup, and other things going on. But keep in mind that the league with the highest ratings in the United States is the Mexican League. The average viewers to a Liga MX game are the highest of any league in the United States, higher than La Liga, higher than Bundesliga, English Premier League.
That's the demographics
MLS.
in the U.S. So that tracks perfectly with the demographics in the U.S., doesn't it?
Yes.
So that's not surprising. But what I was asking or thinking about is if you are a AA team or the 8th or 9th best league, if you want to call them that, and you're signing players at the rate of what the number 1 or number 2 league pays, that is not a sustainable business model. You can't have Mike Trout and Shohei Ohtani. Shohei Ohtani is a free agent. He's not going to sign with a Korean baseball team, and I don't mean anything against their league. He's going to go to the best league, which is Major League Baseball, to the team that can offer him the best contract and have a good likelihood of paying it. The concern that you'd have if you had 10 Messis on a team to be a good team, the financial model doesn't work.
Well, although I would argue, David, the evaluation of the team is the financial model right now.
You can't butter your bread with the valuation of your team. You can borrow money on it.
If you sell it, you can. You can butter a lot of bread.
But you have to sell it.
But the amount of butter is not evenly distributed. And so when you have, John was referencing this before, when you have owners who are dying to spend, and you have, again, this other class, maybe a majority of owners who want to restrain spending because not for the moral hazards of opening the door to investment funds, but because they just don't want to spend all that much. It's an interesting question to me because, well, now you're deciding to stay a minor league team because that's more profitable for your personal pocketbook.
Well, I'm assuming that most of these owners understand what the delta is, right? They bought the team, I'll make it up, for $150 million. That team is now worth $600 million. That delta is $450 million. It would cost you to field an English Premier League team in the top 6 or 8. It would cost you almost that. It would cost you $300 or $400 million a year to field a team as well. So the calculation would be, I will spend the delta between what I paid and what I can get in about 2 years of losses. That's the problem.
That's a terrible business model. That's bankruptcy.
If you own a Van Gogh and you're willing to sell it, you can live a long time on the proceeds from that.
Where do you have the Saudi League in your top 9? The one that almost signed Messi and did sign Ronaldo? Where is that ranked?
Oh, I would think they're somewhere 15 to 30. I don't really know because
Major League Soccer.
Major League Soccer. If you played a League's Cup with the Saudi League and Major League Soccer, it would be the equivalent of Alabama and a high school team in Virginia.
So here's the point: they offered Messi an obscene amount of money to come there. They offered Ronaldo an obscene amount. Ronaldo said yes. Messi says no. One of them, their price was hit, and they gave the T. One of them, their price wasn't hit, so Messi did not take the money and chose Miami instead. But when you have a league who's ranked 15th to 30th, and they're trying to compete for players who should be playing in the top 5 leagues, the only way to get them is to pay an amount of money that does not match what is reasonable to play in that league. And the only way to do it is when you've got $500 billion that you're looking to just spend. And that is why the Saudi, if we can turn this, tide it back, that may not be the expression. This is why it's so dangerous what's happening with the sovereign fund, because there is no economic model they're using. They're throwing numbers around and valuation numbers around that we cannot possibly match.
Yeah, would be interesting. It does tend, David, to lead you to pay large sums of money. I'm interested in the term obscene amount of money. It's interesting. We'll debate that later. But it means you can really only get those guys. You get a Ronaldo to come because he doesn't really care, right? He's been in his World Cups. He's won. He's been in the Champions League. He doesn't care. What would be more interesting is to say, instead of spending $300, $400, $500 million on that player, what if we bought 15 players for $20 million a piece and went out and bought but could you get the 21-year-olds, the 22 to 23-year-olds to decide, I am going to go make my future in the Saudi league.
That's what Live Golf is. Live Golf, basically, that's their motto.
Well, Live Golf was able to do both because they had so much money. They said, we'll pay, the guys making 20 million, we'll pay them 100. We'll pay the guys making 10, 50. We'll pay the guys making 5, 25. So they went and bought everybody they bought everybody who had a price. By the way, let me repeat, as people are listening to this, my price is $1 trillion. We'll do almost anything for $1 trillion.
It's only almost anything.
John, you asked for the definition of obscenity. I believe Supreme Court Justice Potter Stewart had one. It was, I know it when I see it. I believe what you just said, I'll do almost anything for $1 trillion, is meeting that definition.
It begs the question, what's left? Because it's almost anything, which means we're not quite at the top. Maybe we have to get to 2 trillion for anything.
Well, it's like never saying never, David. I don't think you want to say anything. There must be something that everybody doesn't want to do, no matter for what money. I'm not prepared to answer that question for myself right now. I'd like to give it a little thought.
I want to return to the group photo of commissioners, because as this math is being done on what are the costs and benefits of expanding, of paying, of trying to be better as a product, I wonder what Don Garber, as he tries to creep in to the center of this picture, is rooting for, right? Like, he's a guy who is tasked with working for owners, but also he's a guy who wants to be in that photograph. And so how does he balance and strategize, David, based on how you understand these people to work?
So the way Uncle Gus works, the one who's always trying to get in every photo, the one who doesn't sort of belong but sort of hangs out, stays at the party too long, doesn't help clean up, the way it works is that you feel that you cannot be asked to join the table. You have to make it so there's no other choice, but you're at the table. So doing deals like the Messi deal, to me, is his first entree into, look, I can do big business here. I don't have to operate under the rules of our league with a salary cap. I can find workarounds, whether it's with Apple or equity of the team. And eventually you get enough cred, street cred, where you get to join the table. So I view this Messi deal as a hugely important thing for Don Garber.
He wants more of it.
Every day. He's on to the next deal.
Yeah. I will still only quarrel with, if you ask Don Garber if he could have MLS cited in every reference to the Big Five or sit at a table with the other 4 commissioners, he would pick the former.
Okay, John. Yes.
It's his job. It's his job.
I'm getting a sense of how you two individually, respectively, feel about being in the center of photographs.
Well, he's always the tall one. He's in the back. I'm the one in front of every photograph.
David John is holding the basketball right next to the class picture sign.
That is always me with the team. I had the label with the team, like the 10U, the Minnesota Twins, your Little League team. I was that guy. Hold the sign, David.
So the last topic I want to get to you guys is this question of Bob Huggins. Because Bob Huggins, this is a story about employers and employees. You both are employers. You have both been employees. But Bob Huggins, to recap briefly, was a man who resigned every possible way you could resign. Your personal attorney does it. Your wife does it. You do it by showing up in person and giving a speech to your team in the locker room. And then you do it by going to your desk and cleaning it out and going home and letting weeks pass, only to decide 20 days later that I actually never resigned, a message you communicate to a new lawyer. And so, have you guys ever had anything like this happen to you in your respective careers?
The first thing that I did, John, when this happened is I called 2 of the executives I worked with for many years. The first thing when I read this, and I said, have we ever had an employee who resigned and then came back to us and said, no, I didn't resign? And the answer that was given back to me is what I recalled, which is anytime an employee leaves, we have them sign a separation agreement. And so we don't ever get into that conversation. There is no change in your mind once you sign on the dotted line, and we don't release a penny of severance or anything, whether we're firing for cause or not for cause. Whenever we terminate, we get the separation agreement and we start the negotiation. So it has never come up that someone has changed their mind because we wouldn't allow it because there'd be a document.
So West Virginia basketball, to be clear, they messed this up by not having that as part of this process, letting the longtime head coach go that way.
It's staggering to me, and we've seen it everywhere recently with Gruden. We've seen it with Fitzgerald, and we've seen it now with Huggins. I do not know what these people are doing. John, you would never allow this people to walk away without a separation agreement.
You would not. I am assuming, and David, you're more conversant in this than I am. I am assuming that he was pressured to resign, given some of his behavior, was potentially embarrassed, and that somebody a few days later pointed out that you do know, if you go back and read your contract, that if you resign, you give up all rights to any severance, any negotiation for settlement. And in fact, if you say you didn't resign and that you're now going to be terminated with there being an argument about whether it's for or not for cause, he is going to try to negotiate a bigger settlement. That's all this is, isn't it?
Yes.
And he's prepared to look like a fool in order to potentially get several $1 million. And my guess is it will be something slightly less than $1 trillion. Well, West Virginia will settle on him.
I promise you, John, that your number in a severance situation would be far lower than a T if the opposite were to look like a fool. You'd be happy to look like a fool for 10 M's, I would assume, as anyone would be. And that's what the coaches are now doing, Fitzgerald included. They're all looking and okay to look like a fool because there's a lot of money on the table.
Well, I'm slightly less expensive to look like a fool than to violate my principles.
I just like that at the very end of this episode that we've settled upon the Price is Right approach to morality. I would like to sell all of my morals for $1 trillion plus one just to be the guy who's standing upright with a moral backbone.
I'm going with $1.
I know you are.
And I'm going to win.
David Samson, John Skipper, thank you for your consciences.